Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks. And if you've ever wondered what to spend your hard-earned Battle Pass tokens on, then today is going to be the video for you. There are a couple of new tanks for 2024, and I'm going to be breaking down not only the new tanks, but all of the vehicles, especially with the price increases, to let you know which vehicles are not just the most competitive, but which ones are also the most fun for your tokens. So firstly, I want to stress that your tokens do not expire between the battle passes throughout the year. There are currently 3 seasons of the battle pass. We're just at the end of the second one. There's going to be one more starting on pretty much like September the 5th or 4th for the European server. And so your tokens don't have to be spent. They will carry over for the final season of the battle pass, but then after that season expires, which will most likely be very early in December, you will have until the 21st of December to be able to spend your tokens. Otherwise, they will be automatically converted into bonds at 1 token is worth 100 bonds. Accordingly, this means if you're a free-to-play customer who doesn't buy the premium battle pass, there are 15 additional tokens that you can earn for next season. And if you're a paying customer, you can get an additional 9, which means that you can get 24 additional tokens. So whatever you have now, factor in that you've got 3 months left to be able to earn up to 24 additional tokens to add to whatever you have before you take a look to see what maybe you should spend them on. Accordingly, this means that if you're a brand new World of Tanks player and you're paying for all of the premium battle passes and you get your 72 tokens, you are only really going to be able to get a third of the total tokens that you need if you need to catch up and purchase all of the vehicles. So just before I start reviewing all of the vehicles, I want to highlight the price increases. This year, you can manage to get 3 extra tokens compared to the previous years, and so Wargaming increased the price of the 4, should we say, standard tanks by 3 to 12. The Kunze Panzer is the only tank that didn't get a price increase, while all of the other vehicles got marginal increases apart from the BZ-58-2 that went from 24 down to 20, with the Cobra actually having the largest increase from 24 to 28, making it one of the more expensive tanks even though it came out a couple of years ago. So without further ado, I'm going to be judging each and every single one of these vehicles based on how competitive they are, how fun they are, how novel they are, and then giving an overall rating. So first up, let's talk about the AE Phase 1, which was the first of these reward vehicles, and all of these tanks get free standard large repair kits, which next patch are only going to have a 60-second cooldown. That not only repair faster, but they're free and you don't have to pay for them. So that means that while none of these tanks make bonus credits, because they get that free large repair kit, it's definitely, it's kind of like 5% of a premium bonus within that regard. Anyway, I digress. The AE Phase 1. This vehicle, it's just fabulous, really, in a hold down position. As soon as you get hold down, you don't have the weak point exposed. The whole of the upper hull's good. You have a bit of an issue here with the turret to the left and the right of the lower part, but it's a brutal tank. And then you've got 10 degrees of gun depression to be able to make it work. You've got fabulous 340 heat rounds that can just be able to butcher their way through anything. Bad matchup, okay, no problem. Good matchup, well, even better. Then lower tier tanks are going to struggle with some of your lower plate, but the mid and higher tier vehicles really aren't going to. It's just a great, easy tank to be able to play. Accordingly, I think from a competitive perspective, I'm going to have to give this thing a B. From a fun perspective, for me, there's just so many other vehicles out there that kind of do what this thing does. I'm probably going to give it a B. From a novel perspective, I don't know, this thing's going to get more of a C, because the only thing that's really funky about this tank has to be the fact that it gets these like 2 sets of tracks, but it doesn't actually get the reserve track mechanic. I mean, when you think about it, this tank would be perfect for reserve track mechanics, right? You could have the front off and be able to just go, take the back off and still use the front roller. It would be amazing from that perspective, but definitely not the mechanics for it. So overall, I think I'll give the AE Phase 1 a B. A B overall. I think it's closer to a B than it is to a C. A lot of people might find this thing a little bit boring, and I think the real problem with the AE Phase 1 is that you could just be playing a Chieftain prototype. But remember that you can't buy a Chieftain prototype for your Battle Pass points. You're going to have to pony up like the $40 or so to be able to get the Chieftain prototype. So that still means the AE Phase 1, it's definitely solid. But if you are a paying customer, then you might want to just play a Chieftain prototype instead. And I guess the biggest problem for the AE Phase 1 is the Concept 1B is in the game. And I'd far rather play a Concept 1B than an AE Phase 1 just for that extra speed. But Nevertheless, the A Phase 1 is a lot more simple to play, and if you're a casual player, you can't go wrong with an AE Phase 1. Next up, I want to talk about the Char Futur 4. I absolutely adore this tank. Not only is it competitive, it's very competitive. For me, I would give it an S, but this is kind of be more of a rating for everyone. I think this is S tier. I get 2 kills a game, 4K combined. I'm averaging 65 to 70% win ratio playing this thing solo. It's a monster tank because it's just got everything. It's got gun depression at 7.5 degrees. It's got the same gun that you use on the Batchat, which is absolutely fabulous. It has not that bad of a reload. It's got decent accuracy as well. The only thing that sucks is its intraclip reload is 4 seconds, but when you're just delivering those shells so reliably, it doesn't really feel like it matters. Add to that decent camo rating, so you can be able to scout. And of course, as an autoloader, you don't need to take a gun rammer, so that frees up an equipment slot, and a crazy track repair time because of this free large repair kit. This thing's an absolute monster. From a fun perspective, this tank is just such a cooler for me of my brain. If I'm super stressed, I just get in a Char. It just can perform everywhere it wants to on the battlefield, play at long range, play as an all-in assassin. Casual players will still be able to go in, just hold down the mouse button and deal 1,500 damage, which for a lot of players is a good result. Very good players are going to know how to use all of this tank strengths, all of the different positions that you're going to be able to get into. I give this thing an S tier for fun. It's an absolute wonderful vehicle. From a novel perspective, it kind of just feels like it's a Batchat down from tier 10 down to tier 9. And now that the Char 75 is in the game as well, there are options out there that are kind of just as funky, if not more funky, than the Char Futur 4. I guess the biggest thing that might affect the Char Futur 4 this year is that next patch, the Batchat is going to be significantly buffed at tier 10. And when the Batchat gets significantly buffed at tier 10, a lot of people who really enjoy the tier 9 matchmaking that the Char has and that extra gun depression, they're still going to enjoy those aspects, but it's going to be kind of like mitigated a little bit because that Batchat is going to be so powerful at tier 10. So overall for the Char, I want to give this thing an S. I still think it's by far the best of the reward vehicles, and I would thoroughly recommend that everyone gets this. I'm very surprised that Wargaming hasn't increased the price from 12 tokens of the Char Futur 4. And if we go and take a look at kind of like the numbers of people who are playing the Char Futur 4, the numbers speak for themselves. There's a reason why. I think if I probably just reset the filters, you're going to see that this is the second most popular vehicle in World of Tanks now. It's overtaken the ELC V90, it's overtaken the Leopard 1. There's a reason why people play this tank, and nobody seems to be complaining that it's overpowered. But spoilers, it's actually got some of the best win ratio differences. It's this tank that nobody thinks is OP, but actually is just performing all the way across the board. Wonderful vehicle. This would be the #1 recommendation I have for spending your tokens first, if you have them, if you know how to play like a medium tank or a light tank. Next up, Object 7772. This one's a little bit of a weirdo, really. The Object 7772 is it's this kind of like Soviet nothing tank, really. It doesn't do anything special, but it doesn't do anything wrong. It kind of side-scraped pretty well because even though it's got a central turret, it has a very long frontal hull, which makes it very awkward. But still, you can get your proper angle about like this, about like that. Hide your lower plate, side-scrape. I think it's actually a brutal tank when you also factor in that it gets big alpha at 440 with 340 heat penetration. It's not a bad tank. The only thing that sucks about this vehicle is its aim time's a little long, its gun handling isn't exactly great, and its accuracy is poor, but its view range kind of makes up for that. 6 degrees of gun depression, fairly low profile vehicle, doesn't even get that bad camo rating. Not that I would really recommend playing this thing like a scout. It's just a solid tank once again, and once you get into a nice matchup, your opponents are going to have a real hard time against you. I think the 772 is a very solid vehicle. From a competitive standpoint, this thing, it's between a B and an A. I'd probably put it closer towards the A than the B. It's actually better for everyone, either casual players, and if you know how to use this tank strength, you'll do better in this thing than you should do in an A Phase 1. From a fun perspective, however, I don't think it's very fun. It's about as generic as it gets in World of Tanks, and it doesn't really have those amazing scenarios like you can do with an AE Phase 1 where you get the vehicle hull down. From like a novel perspective as well, I'm going to have to give this thing a C. There's lots of other tier 9s that you could play, and I think now that the Object 752 is in the game, if you can buy that premium tank, I cannot imagine why you would play a 7772 when you could play a 752 and be able to make credits and have an autoloader. And that vehicle, I just 3-marked it recently. That tank is S tier. This vehicle, not. This is going to be probably getting a B overall because it's competitive, but it's just no fun. Still not a bad tank to purchase for its price. Okay, now let's talk about the K91 PT. The K91 PT is a sneaky, high damage per minute tank destroyer that should do better than it actually does. You would really think that a tank that has 2,700 damage per minute has really good structure armor as well if you manage to go hull down against everything that you can build to fight, and also can get an obnoxious like 40% camo while it's moving and like at least 50% camo while it's stationary, while also not being slow and having fairly good gun handling would just be a better tank. And while it's definitely not bad with regards to its win ratio difference, there are so many better tier 9 tank destroyers that you could play, like a T95 Tortoise, the 111G, all big DPM or big alpha damage tanks. Even the Gonkovica and the Foch are trashing the K91 PT. However, from like a premium / reward perspective, the only vehicle that's getting a better win ratio difference is the TL7. So it's not that bad. I'd say overall from a competitive stand, probably get a B. From like a fun perspective, it's tricky. If you like the idea of going around in a sneaky tank destroyer that can kind of face hug occasionally, once you've learnt this thing, it's going to get a B from me. From like a novel perspective, I think it probably gets more of an A from a novel perspective, because this tank kind of reminds me of what the old SU tech tree used to feel like. You know, those tanks before they became kind of the brawly vehicles with armor, when they only used to just have the structure armor and have like quite nice guns to go around with. All in all, I still think that even though I'm kind of rating this one quite highly, I just don't. It's definitely it's more of kind of like a C tank than a B tank. It's not bad across the board, but I still just couldn't be able to bring myself to thoroughly recommend this and to be able to spend your hard-earned tokens on the K91 PT. Now let's talk about the Kunze Panzer. Look, you all know me, I've played a lot of World of Tanks, but this tank, honestly, it just gives me a headache from purely one perspective. And that is that the vehicle is annoying as hell to play, because you have great damage per minute when you're outside the siege mode, or should we say it is called a siege mode, and when you enter the siege mode, then you get good accuracy and good aim time, but you get bad gun handling, but you get all of the gun depression that you want to have on the vehicle. Can you believe that QuickyBaby, who is like the gun depression god since kind of like the comic came out in 2012, how much I've been salivating over having 12 degrees of gun depression, has the opportunity to have 15 degrees of gun depression with this vehicle's hydropneumatic suspension, and yet here I am thinking that this vehicle just gives me a headache. Either I've got old or this tank is just annoying. And well, considering that I feel like I'm playing World of Tanks as good as I ever have done, I think I'm going to still go that this tank is just really annoying and frustrating. I think the fact that if you're somebody who likes to min-max, that you'll be kind of like entering the siege mode to be able to shoot, leaving the siege mode immediately to be able to improve your rate of fire, trying to enter the siege mode 2 seconds before you finish reloading so you can be able to get that shot. And the thing is that the tank's not even that competitive. I'm going to have to give it overall like a B, if not... you know what? We've had quite a few vehicles go in that are kind of just as good, if not better, over the last... I'm going to give it a B. From a fun perspective, look, if it was for me, I'd give it a D. It's a really frustrating tank to play. I think most 90% of players are going to have more fun in a Leopard prototype. However, I have to be fair here, and there will be a small proportion of players who think that having that siege mode to be able to go into it is actually fun from that perspective. From a novel perspective, I don't know, man. It just feels like it's a bad Leopard prototype with a hydropneumatic suspension. But it is different enough. Overall, this vehicle, it's going to get a B. I personally don't like it. For me, it gives me a headache. However, if you like the idea of trying to min-max and have to be constantly on it to think about entering and leaving the siege mode to be able to play rather than actually focusing on trying to get your shots in, then go for it. You can probably find a worse tank than the Kunze Panzer. All right, now the Lorraine 50T. All right, this vehicle, from a competitive perspective, it is going straight in at a D tier. We haven't had a D in any of the categories so far. It's not very competitive at all. The only thing that this tank is good for is sitting in a hold down position where your opponents are directly in front of you and they don't have the side of your turret, which isn't even that good, and they just let you shoot them. And that's where, probably in the turret as well. That's because as soon as you expose your hull armor becomes horrendous on this tank as well. So you better only be exposing that turret, otherwise you're going to regret it, especially with this lopsided gun. When you're not using your gun depression, your weak point is going to annoy you, and your hull armor is absolutely tragic. Your side gets overmatched by all 91mm caliber guns. This vehicle is in the need of a serious buff inside World of Tanks. The only good things about this tank, probably the accuracy and the fact that you can load gold, but the gold isn't even that good on this tank as well. Oh my god, I hate it. But the weird thing is that even though I hate this vehicle, I seem to be at least be doing reasonably okay in World of Tanks with it. But I think that's probably just like heavy hold down meta, get to a ridgeline with the vehicle speed and just be really annoying in that position. But from a fun perspective, I'm going to have to be giving this thing a... Oh, it's a D. It's a D. Why would you ever play this when you could play like an A phase 1, or you could play anything, a chieftain, you could play a concept, you could play anything. You could even play tech tree tanks that are just way more fun than this vehicle. From a novel perspective, a D as well. It's just no different. It's basically taking the hull of a tier 8 premium medium and then just slapping an AMX turret on it. It's very unimaginative. It's not a very good tank. And so overall, I'm going to be slapping a D on this. But let me clarify that even though I'm rating this thing as a D, there's nothing stopping you if you know your maps and you know where you can be able to use this vehicle's great gun depression with 10 degrees to just go forwards, race into position, and just be blooming annoying to your opponents once you've got there. But trust me, you better take some satisfaction in kind of annoying your opponents, because the vehicle is not really going to give you any joy at all. It's a horrible tank within that regard, and trust me, you will have to try really hard to be able to make this thing work. But it is possible. Next up, we're going to be talking about a freak of a tank. This is the Cobra. This vehicle has 3 different alphas of ammunition, 360, 490, or 515, with 3 different pens as well, 268, 210, and 120 millimeters. If you're able to penetrate a full mag of the premium HE on this tank with that 210 millimeters of pen, that's 1,960 damage in 4.5 seconds. And if you fail to penetrate your shots, they're still going to splash because they're high explosive rounds. This thing also gets 10 degrees of gun depression. It's really fast backwards. And I guess the only downside to this vehicle is its bloom after firing is absolutely horrendous. So until you get that final field mod where you must take the one that reduces your bloom after firing, and you combine that with hopefully an experimental turbo to improve the vehicle's poor top speed and the best kind of vert stabs that you can get on the tank, man, it just feels absolutely horrible. But the vehicle is just crazy good for just punishing and removing entire tier 9 tanks from the game, or crippling tier 10s, or killing multiple tier 8s if it's able to penetrate its shot. For an overall, I want to give this thing a B, but let me clarify, if you're a very good player, it's going to be more of an A tier with your carry potential, and conversely, if you're not a good player, it's probably going to be like down at a C or a D for how competitive you can be. From a fun perspective, I don't know. If the mag goes in, S. If the mag doesn't, well, F. Press F on your keyboard to pay respects for how many credits you're going to waste while also having absolutely no fun. No, overall, I have to give this thing an S, at least in bursts, because once you do manage to land those bursts, yeah, it is brutal. But then again, for every time that you manage to get those S burst mags, A for overall. Okay, fun. Overall fun, I'll give it an A. From a novel perspective, dude, this thing's like an S. Did I forget to mention that this thing even has turret armor as well? So that means that your opponents are going to struggle to deal with the turret on this tank. So you can literally just come over the ridge and be like, oh, hello, I see you've got some hit points there. Oh, I'm going to be able to devour them now. And while the turret isn't perfect, it's an absolute crazy horse from that perspective. Overall, A. It's not only just a reasonably competitive tank, it's fun and it's novel at the same time. This thing overall gets an A from me. It's a solid pick, and you can see why Wargaming increased the price to the maximum 28. However, when I think about it, if the token price was cheaper, I might give this thing like an S overall. But I think the Char just absolutely smashes that. You could buy you could buy a Char, and you could buy like an AE Phase 1 and have points left over for some bounty equipment for the price of a Cobra. And Wargaming perfectly well know this. Okay, so now let's talk about the BZ-58-2. Man, this is such an unimaginative tank. Wargaming literally took the hull of a Tier 7 Chinese Heavy. I'm not even kidding you. This is the hull of a Tier 7 Chinese Heavy, and good luck enjoying 100mm of lower plate pen. And then they took the turret of a Tier 9 Polish Heavy tank. They put them together, and they didn't even bloody give them rockets. Unbelievable. It's a BZ. All of the BZ tanks in the game have rockets. Wargaming, what were you thinking not putting rockets on this tank? Weird, right? There's really not too much to like or even dislike about this tank because, let's be honest, you've still got 8 degrees of gun depression, a pretty big old fat turret, and you do hit for 520 damage. It's not a bad tank, it's just not good at anything. From a competitive perspective, I'd probably give this thing a B. From like a fun perspective, I don't know, I'd give it a C for fun. From a novel perspective, it's definitely, you know what, it's getting a D from a novel perspective. It's like a Lorraine 50T from a clone. Overall though, oh man, it's a tough one. I'd probably have to give it a C overall. I feel like Wargaming should really try harder with their homework when it comes to the BZ-58-2. If Wargaming gave it rockets, yeah, it'd be better. All right, now let's talk about, oh my gosh, no, the Kunze Panzer 3 Project 07 HK. Man, this tank is, I thought it was going to be funky. It's actually ended up being probably one of the biggest tragedies in World of Tanks. I mean, how can Wargaming take basically making a Swedish tank destroyer, making it German, and somehow still make it blooming annoying? Well, I'll tell you, because they overcomplicate it with a siege mode that is just frustrating. As soon as you enter the siege mode, this tank has no damage per minute, a bit like a Kunze Panzer. They basically took a Swedish tank destroyer and they wanted to make it like a Kunze Panzer, and while your accuracy does become legendary and your aim time is good, your gun handling's now bloomin' awful, and you've only got 360 alpha. It's just so frustrating, this siege mode, a lot like with a Kunze Panzer. And the stats don't lie. Let's take a look at the win ratio difference this vehicle's achieving. Oh wow, average win ratio 45.78, minus 3.28% for everyone who plays this vehicle. It is absolutely horrendous. This thing, from a competitive standpoint, it's got to get a D. From a fun perspective, for me, it's getting a D, but I think there will be some people out there who kind of like its overall vibe. I personally don't think so. I guess it has some armor for nice matchups, but here's the really annoying thing about the tank. Because of the fact that the gun isn't linked to the hull, if you want to like raise your gun to shoot your opponents, now your armor isn't working at all. So you have to do this really annoying thing where you're constantly like dragging your mouse down in between your shots to be able to raise up the rear of the tank's hydropneumatic suspension, so that then once you manage to get the gun into the correct position, the armor actually still works. All in all, man, it is a super annoying tank. For me, it's absolutely no fun to play. I'm going to be giving it a D, but keep in mind that if you do fancy just sitting in a position you don't care about, I don't know, firing quickly, maybe it's going to get more of a C for you. From a novel perspective, sure, it's novel. It's kind of like a Swedish tank destroyer that has Kunze Panzer vibes to it, so I'd probably give it an A from novel. Overall, though, I'm going to have to put this in the D section, even though it is kind of like novel. It's horrible, and it costs 28 tokens. Spend your tokens on something else. This thing's a tragedy. It's going to ruin your win ratio, it's going to ruin your mood, and apart from just having it in your garage as like a collector's item, I don't think it's worth it at all. I'm surprised Wargaming did not put the price down of this vehicle to 20 at the very least. And I very much expect, considering how few people are playing this tank, that next season, next year, the price will go down to 20. So next up, ladies and gents, we're going to talk about one of the 2 new tanks, the TT-130M. So this vehicle, is it good? No, I really don't think so. This vehicle is frustrating to play. It's only good at one thing, and that is it uses its rockets, like the BZ should have had, to be able to race into position, and once you've got the field mods and you've got yourself like an experimental turbo, it's pretty quick into position. But when you've got there, you're going to just question why you're playing this tank. Sure, it's got some good armor. The upper hull is very strong. Lower plate sucks. The weak point on top sucks. The 5 degrees of gun depression sucks. It's basically like you're playing a Skoda T56 with some space protection on the top, but it's no fun because you have that huge weak point. You don't have the autoloader. You still got the tragic lower plate. The rockets are nice for racing into position, but then when you get there, you've got horrible gun handling, so you have to take vert stabs. You got horrible accuracy, and to round it all off, your standard pen is 244 and your premium pen is 306. All in all, it's just a bad tank from how fun it plays, and it's not a good tank with how competitive it is. From a competitive perspective, it's going to get a C. However, your results may vary, and some of you might be more of a B level. Some of you will definitely be more of a D level. From a fun perspective, probably a C overall as well. At least you got the rockets to be able to get into position. From a novel perspective, B. Overall, C. Easy pick. Would not recommend. It's kind of like in the same league as the BZ-58-2, where the BZ-58-2 is the better tank for being competitive, but this is kind of the more novel vehicle because it's got rockets, and that's about it. You do you. If you haven't got a Skoda T56, then maybe this is a crew trainer for your VZ-55, which no one's really playing anymore because it's been nerfed into oblivion. Would not recommend the TT-130M. Okay, now let's talk about the final vehicle and the final of the new tanks for 2024. It is the TS-60. This tank is voracious with regards to its armor and with regards to how much damage per minute you can get on this vehicle. If you side scrape in this tank, you have legendary sidearm, and it's only kind of like really big caliber guns that can overmatch the lower part of your hull. You can even over-angle this vehicle and bait your opponents into not being able to catch your tracks at the same time, because a lot like with the Chieftain, the tier 10 Chieftain, it's got this wonderful angling, so you can pretty much be almost side on and your opponents will ricochet. Obviously heat rounds may change that. I guess the real problem with this vehicle is 122mm caliber guns will be able to overmatch the top of the vehicle, and you do have this annoying slant here that gets caught, and if your opponents fire heat, then your turret isn't that good, and also the vehicle doesn't have a fully traversable turret, which is kind of blooming annoying, and this also makes the tank really awkward for coming around corners if your opponents just blast your lower plate, which really does suck on this tank. So it's a hard tank to pressure your opponents and to advance at them, but you do have a good slug of hit points to be able to take a hit. 1,900 base hit points on this vehicle to be able to weather the storm, to be able to trade effectively with the vehicle's great damage per minute. Overall though, this vehicle's just a little too slow, and its gun handling when moving and when turning the tank is a little too poor, and the premium rounds on this tank at 320, they just really don't have that kind of tier 9 or tier 10 tank destroyer kind of vibe. All in all, this is a solid tank. This one, if you're a very good player, is going to be more of an A tier competitiveness. If you're not, I'd say it's a B. It does require you to know how to side scrape a little bit, and it requires you to have knowledge of your opponent's reloads and the confidence to pressure them while they're doing that. And if you can manage to make that work, all in all, I'd give this thing a B. From a novel perspective, this thing, it is different. There's no real tank destroyers in the game that kind of allow you to have an extra heavy tank as opposed to a tank destroyer on your team. But, you know, the T-95 and the Tortoise are probably saying, oh, well, what are you talking about, QB? Do we not count as heavy tanks? And so I guess the big problem with the TS-60 is that when you start to actually meet what the popular tank destroyers are, the T-95, the Tortoise, the WZ-111, all of those tier 9 tank destroyers, and the T-30, they're going to give you an issue. When you fight like the WTF Panzer IVs, you're probably going to be better than them. And so this vehicle, a lot like the K91 PT, which it has a very similar win ratio to, suffers within that regard. There are just really good tier 9 tank destroyers that you could play out there. And so this thing, it's, from a novel perspective, I'm going to give it an A, but overall definitely a B. It's not even close to an A tier with regards to a tank destroyer. And so, ladies and gents, there we go. Those are my overall rankings for the Battle Pass tanks. I would thoroughly recommend, once again, you get a Char Futur 4. Unless you're a horrible light tank or a horrible medium tank player, the Char Futur 4 is not only the best from a competitive perspective, but also the most fun that you can have with your Battle Pass points. Next, I'd recommend to get a Cobra. Then there's a whole glut of tanks that you could be able to get your hands on that, depending on what kind of a vibe you're looking for or what you want to focus on, whether you're kind of like a fun player, you want to just have something that's a little bit different, or you're a competitive player that you could be able to enjoy. It's disappointing that the new tanks that Wargaming are adding in are just really not very good. And while I think the TS-60 is Wargaming's best effort since the Cobra was added a couple of years ago, I still think there's a lot of things that Wargaming could do to be able to improve their Battle Pass tanks. Firstly, give the BZ-58-2 some rockets. Next, give the TT-130M a 2-round autoloader. Give the Kunze Panzer a little bit better rate of fire while it's inside the siege mode, just to improve its soft stats inside the siege mode as well. And for the Lorraine 50T, significantly improve its gun. I would make its rate of fire much better. I would also improve its gun handling significantly, and I would also most likely improve the penetration on its standard and its gold rounds, because that's really what has worked for the 120mm on the tier 10, for example. And for the rest of them, they're all in a pretty good place. And it's really interesting to me that Wargaming started off so hot with their Battle Pass tanks, and then really recently they have been so not. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my extensive look at all of the Battle Pass tanks. I really hope this video is useful and helps you to be able to spend your Battle Pass tokens. If it does, then make sure you give the video a thumbs up. If you hated it, make sure you give the video a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments down below if you agree or disagree with any of the positions that I have put these tanks. And what do you think about Wargaming's pricing in 2024? And do you think that these tanks are going to become even more expensive or less expensive in 2025? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.